Hello and welcome to day 2 of your ClickUp mini course. Today we'll talk about structuring your ClickUp hierarchy. We'll go from the largest elements of the hierarchy to the smallest. We'll introduce the concept of hierarchy. We'll talk about creating spaces, organizing them into folders and lists, and then what are tasks, subtasks, and checklists. I've made a diagram about the hierarchy structure so that you get the hang of it. There are 3 core elements to the ClickUp hierarchy. Once you're in your workspace, the largest element is your ClickUp space. Spaces are like departments of your organization. They could represent something like marketing, sales, HR, logistics. Then moving on to folders. Folders are a way to group your projects together. We could have a folder called ads in which we're going to have different lists. It could represent different projects or clients, etc., etc. A list can be at space level, but it can also be under folders. List is basically corresponding to a project, and that's where all of your tasks lie. If we move on to the smallest concepts of the hierarchy, which are tasks, subtasks, and checklists, these are where your information will be stored. What's the action, who does it, what's the deadline, etc., etc. The highest level is tasks. Then we'll have subtasks and checklists. A task could have one subtask in which there's a nested subtask up to 7 levels. That means that the structure of ClickUp can quickly become complex if you start to open up the ability to use as many subtasks as possible. There's actually a ClickUp that will limit the amount of levels you can have under a task. Make sure you limit yourself to a max of 3 levels. I'd go for task, subtask, and subtasks. I wouldn't go beyond that for most of the use cases. So what you have to understand with ClickUp is that it functions in terms of inheritance. If you create statuses, custom fields, invite members, or make automations in ClickUp at space, folder, or list level, it will apply to everything that's below. If I customize the statuses for that whole space, it will apply to all the folders, lists that are below that space. And that is key when setting up your workspace, because you have to make sure that you create things at the smallest needed level. Very often I see use cases where you create a custom field for your social media, and instead of putting it in your social media list, you will put it in the whole marketing space, and it will apply to all of the lists that are totally unrelated to social media. So we'll clutter the lists that other teams are working on. Now moving on to how to create a space in ClickUp. All you have to do is click that plus button and go to new space and name your space. We'll use space demo as an example. You can put a description, you can pick an icon if you want to, and then you can choose to make that space private or open it up to all your organization. You can then configure your statuses. We'll talk about that in the next courses. Talking about ClickApps, we've seen that you can turn on and off specific ClickUp features in the previous course. These are called ClickApps. And this can apply to the whole workspace, but you can also turn on and off some ClickApps per space. What I'd advise you to do is the same way as the workspace ClickApps, just turn them all off and ask yourself, what features do I actually need? Do I need priorities? Yes. Do I need to use custom fields? Yes, I do. Do I need tags? Actually, I don't. Do I need to estimate my tasks? Yes, etc., etc. Moving on to the views. What I recommend you straight away is to simplify everything. And that's key when setting up your ClickUp workspace. So disable all the views and keep the list view. You can create different views in list, space, folder level later anyway. Then it will ask you if you're good with the configuration, and we'll create the space. As you can see, ClickUp created a list by default in that space demo. And what we'll do is create a folder. I'll just click that plus and go to folder, and I'll name that folder demo. We'll create a new list in that folder and we'll call it list 2. And to show you an example of the inheritance system, we'll create a task. We'll call it task alpha here. What happens is that this task is in list 2, but you can also see it in a view at folder level, it will appear here. Same way you could see it at the space level if you wanted to. And you could also create a task in the first list, name it task beta, and you'd be able to see it at folder level, space level, but you wouldn't be able to see task beta in list 2 because it was created in list 1. What we need to do when structuring our ClickUp workspace is to ask ourselves, how is my organization divided? How is it split up? How does it work together? Make sure that you're reflecting ClickUp the way your organization is structured. For example, if you have a marketing department, what you'll do is that you'll create a marketing space. I'll just use this diagram tool. It's called Whimsical, but you could use Miro or you could use ClickUp, which offers a diagram tool actually, and we'll lay out our structure. I'll add a space called marketing, and here I'll ask myself, how's my marketing department structured? And there's a part of my department which does content and another one which does ads. I'll create 2 folders, one called content and another one called ads. And in my content team, we work on 3 topics. We work on publishing newsletters, SEO with blogging articles, and social media posts. What I'll do is that I'll create 3 lists, one called newsletters, one called blog, and one called social for social media. And I know that my ad teams works on Google Ads and Facebook Ads. I'll create 2 lists, one called Google Ads and another one called Facebook Ads. Perfect. I have my structure for my marketing department set up. What I'll do is that I'll move back to ClickUp. Back to ClickUp, as you can see, I've created a space called marketing with folders containing ads and content teams, in which there's Facebook ads, Google ads, and for the content, there's a list called newsletter, blog, social media, etc. I've made sure that I've reflected my department structure in ClickUp. Obviously, sometimes structure can be more complex. It can require more reflection. There can be different ways to structure your department. That's why I help my clients do that. What we'll do is that we'll deconstruct how their teams are organized and make sure that it's fully optimized for the ClickUp hierarchy. And that saves them hours into making mistakes and structuring ClickUp the wrong way. But assuming we have the right structure here, we'll create a task and I'll show you the difference between subtasks and checklists. I'll go to newsletter and I'll create a newsletter article that I will call how to set up ClickUp. What I couldn't do here is create subtasks. And I can say, for example, write the article and then schedule the article and then review open rates, for example. And these are basically 3 actions that I have to do to make sure my newsletter project has been completed. That's one way to do it. I could also open up the parent task, how to set up ClickUp, and instead of using subtasks, I could use checklists. The difference between subtasks and checklists is that checklists are just done, not done actions. You tick them, consider them done. I'll create 3 elements for this checklist. Create the article, schedule a newsletter, and review open rates. And I can just tick them and say they're done. With subtasks, I could assign them to people, define a priority, set up a due date, and just open it up and collaborate on it the same way I can do it on the task. So when you pick between subtasks and checklists, make sure that you pick the appropriate one. And very often, subtasks are slightly better for getting an overview because you can just open them from your view, but checklists also simplify the ClickUp structure, and once you start to have a lot of subtasks, it can become overwhelming. One last very important advice when setting up ClickUp is to make sure that you simplify the structure as much as possible. Make it as lean as possible. Don't create too many lists. Review your lists, and if there are lists that have less than 20 tasks ongoing, it's probably that you can merge them with another list and use a custom field to group your tasks through different criteria. That's it for today, and thank you for following up on structuring your ClickUp hierarchy.